kind introduction. I am sorry not to be there in person, but delighted to be invited and to speak with you today about people who have found themselves forced to move and the welcoming communities that they have joined. Again, thank you for the introduction. I want to emphasize a piece about my identity that was mentioned, which is that I myself am the daughter of refugees. I'm a second generation Palestinian refugee. I was born and raised in Jordan in 1976, and my parents were displaced to Jordan. My parents and grandparents were displaced to Jordan in 1967. If we can advance the slide, I'll show you a picture of my grandmother that I loved. This picture, she's holding the bowl, and you can tell that she's very happy. She's with her family. She and her two children, which means my mother and my uncle, when they were first displaced to Jordan, lived in refugee camps and eventually managed to escape the drudgeries of the refugee camps. For the rest of their lives, both on both sides, my paternal and maternal grandparents lived outside of Palestine. I'm not in that picture. A lot of people say they see me in my family's faces, which is wonderful. This woman, my grandmother, raised me. And the thing I remember the most vivid to me about that upbringing was her nighttime stories about Palestine, how much she loved Palestine, the rich intricacies of life in Palestine, and how painful it was for her to be forced to leave and to be separated from her family in 1967, and the sense of exclusion and violence that she experienced during those early years of her displacement in Jordan. Those stories and the way that she raised me to understand her experience as a displaced individual and as a refugee really informed the ways I understood the experience of all refugees. When I came to the US as a graduate student, my grandmother said to me a phrase that I will never forget. You are taking my soul with you. In Arabic, it's أخذتي روحي معاكي. And I've heard this expression many times before. It was the way that my grandmother talked about leaving Palestine, that it was like leaving her soul behind. And so many refugees that we work with talk about separation from their families and separation from their home country in this way. They feel disembodied. They feel like their souls have stayed behind and it's only their body that they've taken with them. For my grandmother, her soul stayed in Jerusalem. She lived on Jabal al-Mukabbir until 1967, and she was forced to go to Jordan. She died in Jordan, and until her dying day, all she wanted to do was return to her home country. In 2008, I had the opportunity to come back to the US to join the faculty of Guilford College, which is in Greensboro, North Carolina. So I am joining you today from Greensboro. And in 2015, I was by that point a tenured professor. I was settled in Greensboro, as settled as you can be. I have two daughters and you know, a job that is as permanent as a job can get when you have tenure. And in 2015, the Syrian refugee crisis was really raging. And you will remember this. I'm not seeing the folks in the audience, so I can't gauge your ages. But if you're, you know, in your 30s and 40s, you probably remember Aylan Kurdi. If we can advance the slide. Aylan Kurdi was a little boy who drowned with his mother and brother when they were trying to cross from Turkey to Greece because they were trying to make their way to Europe. This is a study, a painting that was created by one of my students at Guilford College when I asked her to imagine what it would have looked like had Aylan made his journey successfully and was able to be received by his father, who was going to follow them later. But if you remember that image, it was of Aylan's body being washed ashore. And the rest of the world, like myself, was shattered by that picture, by what happened to that Syrian boy. The world responded in a way that it hadn't responded before to Syrian refugees, reacted very powerfully. And germane to our conversation was what I heard Pope Francis say. So at that time, Pope Francis, who has and continued to be supportive of displaced individuals, at that moment called on every parish in Europe to host one refugee family. So here I am in Greensboro, desperate, hopeless, helpless, or feeling helpless, really wondering about the role of academic institutions in a global crisis like this. How are we supposed to respond as teachers, as educators, as students, as administrators of higher learning? And to some of the things that I heard in the opening ceremony, what is our accountability? What is our complicity as institutions that are built on the land of the dispossessed and the displaced? Very specifically, I really was asking myself, how could I leverage my position and my institution to do something material, something real with supporting forcibly displaced individuals? Like, we were doing all the usual things that you would imagine a higher education institution was doing. We were doing the panels and the conferences and the teach-ins, and we signed petitions and we had public talks and we made statements, which are all really important and necessary. But at the time, I was looking for something material. One of the things that really struck me at the time was an action that was taken by Austrian activists who drove down from Austria to drive up hundreds of Syrian refugees who are trying to make their way to Germany. So I really appreciated this idea of this kind of material support, right? Trying to help somebody get from one place to another. And I wish that I was in Austria with a car. And then I realized I was somewhere better, a refugee resettlement hub. Greensboro is a refugee resettlement hub. There are refugee resettlement hubs in Maine, as you know. And that I had something better than a car at my disposal, a college campus. And as I was reflecting on the Pope's invocation to what is called radical hospitality, I remembered a few very important things. And if we can advance the slide, here are some of the things that I was thinking about when I was thinking about the Pope's call. First of all, the Arabic word for campus is haram, al-haram al-jami'i. Haram literally means in Arabic an inviolable space. It means a sanctuary. The other really important concept is the concept of stewardship. Guilford College is a Quaker institution, and one of the important concepts in Quakerism is stewardship. How do you steward the resources that are at your disposal in ways that align with the values that you say you espouse, in ways that are just and right and good? So when I was thinking about all these things, a really very simple, basic realization came to me that this place where I was, the campus of Guilford College, and indeed every other college and university campus in the US and in the world, is exactly like a parish. It's a campus, a college campus, is not just a place where we think and study and teach. It is indeed a small city. As much as it is a mind or a hive mind, it is a place. It's a place where we have everything necessary to respond to the Pope's call on smaller communities to host a refugee family. And I want you to think about your alma mater. I want you to think about any universities or colleges you're connected with. Residential campuses especially have housing, they have cafeterias, they have clinics, they have plenty of human resources and expertise to provide all of the needed financial, social, and community support that newcomers need to make their way from the misery to the unknown, right? Because when they resettle, it is truly unknown to them. So that fall of 2015, inspired by this, I walked into Guilford College's president's office and I asked for a house on our campus to host refugees. We used a faculty house and we still do. So it's a residential separate house with a yard and well located, close to a lot of amenities, so that we can extend radical hospitality. Now, I just want to say something important about the concept of radical hospitality. The word radical comes from the Latin root. So hospitality, of course, we know means to welcome, but radical hospitality means to go beyond ordinary acts of welcome so that the people that you're welcoming feel rooted, that they feel genuinely part of your community. So I want you to think about the following questions, and maybe you can talk about them later at your tables. If you can advance the slide to some of the questions I'd like you to think about. I'd like you to think about, where do you feel rooted and why do you feel rooted there? This could be an identity, it could be a community, it could be a place, it could be a people. I am rooted in my Palestinian identity and I'm also rooted in Greensboro. So it could be multiple things. But in your place of work, I'd like you to think about your place of work. What is it that makes you feel like you belong there? Or what happened to make you feel welcomed? So thinking about the things that the small things or the big things that people do to make people feel welcome in the workplace, that's something I'd like you to think about. Now, the second important concept that really undergirds the ethos of every campus of refuge is the concept of parish, right? So a parish is a village or a small town, and the people in that small town constitute a community, not because they're in close proximity to each other only, but because they're all under the care of one church or one priest. So, in other words, a parish is a group of people who are bound to each other by place and ethos. And that sounds to me exactly like a college or university. A group of people who inhabit the same space and they're connected to each other by similar values and goals. In other words, a parish, like a college, like a company or a corporation, is an ecosystem, right? And it takes a parish or a college or a company, it takes an ecosystem to make newcomers feel welcomed. So there's an expression which is overused, but it doesn't make it any less true, which is it takes a village, or in this case, a parish, or a campus, or your company, or your place of business to make people feel like they're welcomed. So in 2015, we got everybody in our ecosystem involved. That didn't just mean the campus, it meant our partners, resettlement agency partners, it meant our faculty, our students, our staff. We got everybody involved, and the response was heartwarming. From the first year students who really understood what it meant to be far away from their home, to the seniors who knew how important it was to have a support system when you embark on a new beginning. We had professors participate. They all saw Guilford College as a place that was for, with, and in the community, not just apart from it or a part of it. And we founded new partnerships and deepened existing partnerships with our local businesses, our neighbors, our local faith communities. I love showing this next picture, this slide of the Guilford College community coming together to say, yes, we're going to be a campus refuge. And this was a picture that we took back in 2015, and it contains a lot of people from that ecosystem. We worked for months getting ready for our first guest, whom we welcomed in 2016, a gay man from Uganda. And then we welcomed a Syrian family. Then we welcomed another Syrian family. And we need to update those numbers that were initially mentioned in my introduction. But Guilford so far has hosted over 100 refugees that have come from all over the world. I remember our first guest, Chaps, who came from Uganda, he arrived in January. And there was a blizzard, and of course, all of the trees were barren. And he asked me, why are all the trees dead? And I remembered what I thought when I first came to the US and saw, deciduous plants. I wasn't used to plants not having leaves. But it reminded me that, for many people who are forced from home, what might at first look like death is really the pain of a new life. And that was such an interesting moment. And so, as I said, that was back in 2015. We hosted our first guest in 2016. Here we are in 2025. We've hosted over 100 people on our campus. We're currently hosting a family of 5 from Venezuela. The families that we've hosted come from all over the world, from Burundi, Uganda, Rwanda, Syria, Iraq, Central African Republic, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Venezuela, Colombia, the Sudan, and Afghanistan. They're all looking for a fresh start. My point is that even though the refugee resettlement program is federal, that resettlement takes place locally, right? It happens at the local level. It happens in small ecosystems. So it makes communities and community members the most important factor in refugee resettlement. And that's what every campus of refuge aims to do. It aims to make every college or university into a welcoming community. And so we've expanded over the last 10 years. If you can show the next slide, that'll give you a sense of where we are right now. You can see that these campuses that have become ECAR chapters and are hosting refugees are big and small, urban and rural, public and private, 4-year and 2-year, in quote, red states and quote, blue states, big cities, small cities. So my next question to you that I'd like you to think about, if we can advance the slide, is I want you to think about your ecosystem. Think about your workplace as an ecosystem that you inhabit. And I want you to think about, what is your ecosystem and who are the key players or stakeholders there? And in what ways can this ecosystem be leveraged to support your newest community members? So in my town of Greensboro, otherwise, by the way, known as the Gate City. We have a remarkable history of welcoming refugees. North Carolina has welcomed 4% of all refugee arrivals to the US. We welcomed over 3,000 refugees this past federal fiscal year. Maine resettled close to 700 people in fiscal year 2024, the highest number on record for the last decade in Maine. And the top countries of origin for refugees arriving to Maine are the DRC, Syria, and Venezuela. Many of those refugees are educated and experienced to work in a variety of fields, and nearly 30% of them have bachelor's degrees and 4% have master's degrees. So this diversity and welcoming spirit is crucial, but is now in jeopardy, right? These executive orders that have been issued that have suspended and are really harnessing or holding back our refugee admissions program is tragic in so many ways for so many reasons. And we must continue to advocate for an America that practices radical hospitality. It's an American value. It's what the Statue of Liberty stands for. It's what America means to me and to so many others like me who are immigrants, who are refugee background, who are refugees. Almost all of us in this country are descendants, either more recently or generations back, as you know, of ancestors who came here or were brought here forcibly to this country. So one very important way to humanize, if we have to humanize, I want to say we humanize the refugee resettlement process, not humanize refugees. Refugees are already human. We don't need to humanize humans. We humanize the process. So I encourage people to tell stories. And one of the things I want to emphasize, if we can go to the next slide, is that please remind people that refugees are escaping violence and war, and they are seeking safety and security. They are forced to leave their homes because they're being persecuted. So one way is to reframe that term, refugee, which can be so alienating to folks, and to talk about individuals who are seeking safety and security because they're escaping war and violence. So very important to remember that we have to ground our stories in that fact. I want to tell you very quickly the story of a refugee we hosted on our campus. His name is Ali, if we can advance to the next slide. So Ali al-Khazraji was born in Baghdad in 1971, and he worked very briefly for an American company doing calligraphy work. He's a calligraphist by trade. And he escaped 2 assassination attempts because of his work with the American government. He worked with a company that worked with the American government. And so based on that, he received asylum in the US and came on an SIV, a special immigrant visa. They receive very similar services to refugees. We hosted him on our campus with his family. If you can advance the slide, when they first came, it was Marwa and 3 boys. Now they have a 4th, Adam, who was born here. In case you didn't know, when refugees come to the United States, they're given $1,200 each, one time only, and they get 90 days to become financially independent. And so it's important for campuses to do this work because it really provides a softer landing and a stronger beginning and allows folks to avoid the stress of that initial resettlement that expects them to become financially independent 90 days after they arrive. So when Ali came to the US, he thought that he could work in calligraphy, but of course that's not how it works out. Refugees accept the first job that they're offered. Thankfully, Ali, because Guilford College was able to provide him with access to a studio and art supplies, now does a lot of artwork by commission, and is able to practice his art. And one of the things that we're very proud of is, if you advance to the next slide, when we found out that we would, by the way, one of the things that I am proud of is that Ali designed the cover of the book, American Refuge. So this is Lady Liberty with the word laji, or refugee in Arabic. Ali designed this, and I love what it represents, that tension, but also that coexistence between the spirit of America as a welcoming city and its newcomers. So one of the really wonderful things was that when we found out that Ali, that we were going to be able to meet the Pope, we decided to tell Pope Francis about every campus a refuge. And we asked Ali to create a gift for the Pope. And so if you advance the slide, you will see, this is my book, was selected for North Carolina Reads 2024, which was very helpful in spreading the message across North Carolina. But yes, now it's definitely the next slide. We were able to gift the Pope a plate that was made by Ali. And it was pretty intense getting the plate to the Pope. Apparently, it's not as easy as you think, smuggling things into the Vatican, but we were able to do it. And the plate says in Arabic the verse that the Pope quoted when he called on every parish to host a refugee family. This that you do unto the least brothers of mine, you do unto me. The chapel in the middle was selected as an image by Ali. It is the chapel of the Milk Grotto in Bethlehem, Palestine, where the Holy Family found refuge from violence. Ali is just an example, one of many, of the creativity and beauty of our newest Americans and what they bring to our lives. Focusing on those stories, telling the stories of the individuals is really crucial. And even though human value should not be tied to people's contributions, financial or otherwise, right? They're valuable regardless. It is always good to remind those who believe in the myth that refugees take away our resources that the opposite is actually the case. So from 2005 to 2019, refugees contributed a staggering 123.8 billion more than they cost in government expenditures to the United States economy. There's a lot of information at the Maine Center for Economic Policy about the contribution of new Mainers. Regardless of this larger national, international policies and laws that we are experiencing, I want you to know that what you do locally is still important. It's crucial. For my Palestinian parents and grandparents, for the refugees that we encounter here who struggle so much to find home again, it's really very important for us to engage in radical hospitality and then also what I have come to talk about as radical accountability, that we are accountable to systems and interventions that have created forced displacement. So we need to be hospitable, not only because we should be, not because we're charitable, but because we hold ourselves accountable to our fellow community members, to our fellow new Americans. We ought to do this work not because we can, but because we must. We can go to the last slide where you can see, I think, my information if you'd love to reach out. But it was a pleasure delivering this talk. Hopefully you were able to hear me. And I look forward to passing the baton on to the panelists.
Hi, everyone. It's going to be difficult to follow Dr. Abdo's speech. That was beautiful. And while my topic is not as engaging, I'm here to really hammer home how employers can best support foreign national workers as well as immigrants within the workplace from a legal perspective. It goes without saying that we are currently in a very hostile environment when it comes to federal immigration law. And so as employees, and what we see and what I see in my practice primarily are two big points. One is, how can I understand my rights as an employer in supporting and maintaining proper compliance? And then two, how can I support my employees who may be foreign nationals, may be married to foreign nationals, and coming to you as an employer for those answers. And so realistically, when it comes down to, and I'm going to flip those because they're better to talk about that way, apologies. But when it comes down to supporting employees, the best way to do it is ensuring that you are a source of truth in a very complicated and fast-moving area of law and workplace enforcement that has many different avenues of information. So, for instance, you see on the news, right, it was just happening here in Maine, that there were ICE raids along the road, and you have employees reaching out to you saying, can I come to work? Is it safe to come to work? Am I going to be rated at my place of employment, right? And so as an employer, what is helpful is to make sure you have protocols in place. Yes, please come to work. We have a protocol in place if a federal agent is going to come to our place of work. Yes, that is true. It did happen in Scarborough, but again, if you come to our place of work, There is risk, but also we're here to support you. These are our guidelines of how to properly greet a federal agent at the front desk, right? Is it going to be your receptionist? Do you have a go-to person? And so these are manners of, these are ways employers can create these structures and steps for employees to know that they can trust you in coming to their place of work with the knowledge that you have. Now, going back to the structures in place, as an employer, how can you ensure that you are compliant and that you are, in fact, putting forward those sources of truth in an effective and accurate way? One, I have to say it, but if you don't have immigration counsel, you should get it. As an employer, there are, in fact, obligations that go beyond just the employee, but to your workplace as well. So, for instance, are you ensuring that you have proper I-9 policies? When you are going in to speak to a new candidate, do you know the appropriate questions that you can and cannot ask, right? If there are any recruiters out here, you probably know that you can't ask someone, what is your status? And going forward through that I-9 process, when can you ask those questions? Can you get all the way to the end and realize, oh, I did not properly check my work authorization documents? What do you do then, right? These are all structures and processes that are really important to have in place, especially in today's enforcement environment, because if a federal agent comes to your door, if the I-9 enforcement officers are coming to check your I-9 records, they're going to ask. And you want to be able to show clearly and concisely, we are remaining compliant. We have our two documentations. We completed the I-9 form, and here are our records. Because the more compliant you are, the easier it is to, one, ensure that you are supporting your employees as well as mitigating risk on the employer's part. The final thing I'll add, because I don't want to take up too much more time from the rest of my panelists, is that going back to that source of truth, it is really important, and what we're seeing today a lot is being an empathetic listener and understanding what your employees are coming to you with. As an employer, and I hear it often, employers will come to us and say, well, how can I support so-and-so with what's going on at their child's school? Can they bring their child to work? Or how can I ensure that I have the right information as this source of truth for my employees when the news is changing and policy is realistically being updated by a tweet, right? And the realistic answer is to be comfortable saying, I don't know right now, but I can get you the proper information and still be that trusted source of truth at our place of work. Now, that is very difficult. I also struggle with saying I don't know quite often. But it is really important to show that you are also going through this enforcement environment, these rapidly changing policies in real time as your employees as well. And so it's really important to bring yourself down to that level and understand the anxieties that are coming to you and empathize with, I don't know, but I can assist you. And that is what is really important in today's environment when supporting a foreign national population at your place of work. So now we'll turn it over to Lindsay for...
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lindsay Lopes, and I'll be speaking to the employer's role in terms of these three elements. If we could bring that slide back up, please. So the first of these three elements, knowing your people. This is going to be the most critical element when we're talking about making every workplace a refuge from the employer's perspective. This really starts with building genuine curiosity with your teammates. And ideally, this is going to come through one-on-one conversations. Best practice, your managers, your people leaders should be meeting with their employees regularly on a one-on-one basis. And if your leaders are able to approach these conversations from a place of genuine curiosity and empathy, they're going to be able to build better connections with the people on their team. And I guarantee you that whatever people challenge you're facing at work, showing up with genuine curiosity and with empathy is going to solve about 90% of the problem. Through these conversations and building genuine curiosity and empathy, you're able to ask questions, specifically for individuals who are new Americans, new Mainers, asking those questions without pressure, coming from that genuine curiosity and empathy to understand their story and their experience is going to give you the insight that you need to close any gaps that you may have as an employer when it comes to building an inclusive workplace. Another method of this is employee surveys. This is pretty common and traditional in most workplaces. There's a variety of ways that you can be surveying your employees. What's most important here is that you are communicating how you're utilizing the data that you receive from these surveys. A great way to do this, if you have an all-hands meeting, which all of your employees have access to this meeting, oftentimes is hosted by the president or the CEO of the company. Being able to spend some time talking about what we're hearing from our employees from the surveys and communicating what steps and action we're taking at a targeted scale and scope to address the challenges that we're seeing. Another important element is simply being an observer of the workplace. So observing the experiences of the employees and the people in the workplace and being able to recognize and discern those patterns as they come up. Everybody is different. Everyone's an individual. We all experience the workplace a little bit differently. So someone may have an issue or a challenge with one thing that may not be an issue at all to someone else. But what we really want to start paying attention to is those patterns as they come up and take action to address those. Once we have some information and some data, we're really going to start analyzing the gaps. So it's important to understand, where are we right now as an inclusive workplace and where do we want to be as an inclusive workplace? Once we understand where we are and where we want to go, we then can analyze the gaps. And really what I would direct you to, as David explained previously, is looking at your processes, your procedures, and your policies. It's one thing to say that as an employer we value inclusion or we value DEI, but if your policies, your processes, and procedures don't actually support that, you actually don't value it at all. And some common processes or procedures that you might look at is your onboarding experience. This is such a critical time for anybody coming into the organization. And as human beings, oftentimes we can tell within a few days, weeks, months, if we feel safe and comfortable in an environment or if we don't. So this is such a critical time for your new employees coming into your organization. Some best practices here, of course, you're going to be reviewing job descriptions with all of your new employees coming in. You're, of course, going to be reviewing the activities of the job to make sure there's comfort and understanding there, but also go a bit further and look at the physical requirements of the role. Can everyone meet the physical requirements? What does that look like? Do you need to engage in the interactive process under the ADA to provide accommodations? We're also going to talk about communications. And this may seem sort of simple when we talk to our new employees about how we communicate as an organization, but this is going to go such a long way in ensuring comfort and safety for everybody. And it's as simple as talking about, here at this company, you're going to find a lot of people communicate through email or through phone call or Slack message or Teams message. Being able to equip people with those systems and those tools and that understanding of how people communicate is really going to build a sense of safety and belonging. Another great way to do this is through utilizing a very specific survey method called 30-60-90, which is a method of surveying at the 30-day mark, 60-day mark, and 90-day mark. So you're capturing feedback at those critical points in the onboarding process. You can do this in a variety of ways. You can do this through online surveying. You can do this through one-on-one conversation. I've also done it in group settings where you bring employees together that are sort of within a cohort of joining the company within those timeframes. And you're really gathering that feedback and understanding and implementing it into your processes and procedures. Another important policy or process that you might want to evaluate is your time off and your holiday process. So understanding that, as especially employers in the state of Maine or in America, we oftentimes are utilizing holiday policies that are inclusive of holidays that are traditionally celebrated in Maine or in the US. We want to think about, is that inclusive to the people that are working for us? Do you have a policy that allows people to swap out different holidays or time off in a way that's significant to them? The next step here is implementing and communicate. So we really want to make sure that we're building connections for our new employees. And this could be integrating people into network groups, whether that's internally or externally. You might meet some people here at the Inclusion Maine conference that will be a good resource for some of your new employees. If you have internal network groups as well, getting people connected and oriented to those groups is critically important. You may also utilize an employee assistance program or an EAP. This is, again, a very traditional and common practice in a lot of mid-size or large-size employers. Not only do EAPs give employees access to mental health resources, they oftentimes can also give access to legal resources as well, which can be incredibly helpful. You also want to focus on your one-on-one relationships and mentoring. So again, getting people connected, and I would even take that a step further to not just make introductions via email, but host coffees or lunches for people to really start building those connections, really lending your connections to your new employees. And finally, we want to think about leadership and employee training as well. And this comes back to the first step of really knowing your people and knowing the climate of your workforce. Leadership and employee training is not one size fits all. It's critical that we're not just putting people in a room and talking at them, but that we're really engaging our employees and our leaders in that process to get people out of their comfort zones and start having those difficult conversations. So with that, I will turn it over to Kit.
Thanks, Lindsay, and I want to say thank you so much for having me, and thank you to my co-panelists. I've been making notes to myself throughout everybody else's talks, which is how I think you know it's a good group of folks. I'm going to be pretty brief. There may be some material for you, I'm not sure, but there's also, you can find out pretty much everything about us on the internet. It has not been eaten by AI yet. So the first thing to know about the Maine Human Rights Commission is that we enforce the state anti-discrimination law, not federal law. We don't have anything to do with federal law. We enforce just the one, Maine Human Rights Act, which pulls in a couple of other pieces of state law, but that's it. So focusing on employment, we enforce the anti-discrimination law, which I've said several times. I'll probably say it again. The protected classes are the areas in which we, as a state, have decided to recognize under the law. And in employment, I still have to write these down. I've been here for 6 years. I still can't remember them all. We protect on the basis of race, color, national origin, ancestry, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, religion, age, familial status, and receipt of a final protection from abuse order. This is, in fact, broader than the federal Title VII anti-discrimination law that is enforced by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. It's been in the news a lot recently. We still protect on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity in state law. I'm just going to keep saying that also. Aw, thanks. Discrimination in the workplace can look like a lot of things. I'm going to speak pretty broadly because we're running out of time already. Hiring and firing practices, who gets hired, who gets fired, who gets promoted, demoted, transferred. General terms and conditions, that can be pay, that can be workspace. Does your office provide a private place with a closed door that locks for people who need to pump breast milk, for example, is a thing that they're supposed to do, FYI. Language access, opportunity to take breaks for religious reasons. Lindsay mentioned the holiday policy, that sort of thing. That's when we talk about terms and conditions, we're not just talking about pay and benefits, it's all those other sort of things that happen in a workplace that intersect with your personal life. We also hear a lot about hostile work environments. So that could be harassment on the basis of any of those protected classes, not just sexual harassment, harassment because of race, national origin, religion, ability, disability, all of that. And retaliation. So you've experienced one of these things, you report it to your manager, and all of a sudden, oh, actually, you can't get that time off that you had approved previously. Or you file a complaint with the Maine Human Rights Commission, and suddenly you are demoted, or your shifts change, or you get fired. That's retaliation. It is unlawful under the Maine Human Rights Act. Now, I am a lawyer. For my sins, I apologize. And the thing that I learned in law school that was the most helpful is that the law is useful in about this many of the situations. It is not everything. It's certainly helpful, and we like to have it, and we will, as I said, continue to enforce it. But it is not everything, especially when it comes to thinking about what makes a workplace welcoming, what makes people feel like they belong. As David was saying in the beginning, inclusion is infrastructure, right? And you can have the best policies in the world, and a lot of the people who wind up before the commission do have the best policies in the world. If they're not being implemented, it's almost worse than not having any policy at all, because what you have created is a workplace where people think they're going to be safe, or think they're going to be able to exercise their religion, or think they're going to have an accessible workplace, and then it turns out that they don't. And that can, as we have seen, be devastating to people. So I think I will leave you on that cheerful note. And I think, and I apologize, I know I talk really fast. I have a very young kid and I drink a lot of coffee. But I'll leave you with that. Inclusion is structural, policies matter, practice matters too. And I think we may have time for a question or two. I'll leave that up to our lovely hosts.